The decision that never made headlines but changed everything. Nothing dramatic happened that day. No protests, no emergency meetings, no sense that history was shifting beneath ordinary routines. A decision was made quietly, filed away as routine, and almost immediately forgotten by the public. This story matters today because some of the most powerful changes in the modern world did not arrive through crisis or collapse, but through moments that felt administrative, technical, and unworthy of attention. When change appears boring, it often passes unchecked. The mechanisms of transformation that attract the most scrutiny are the ones that announce themselves through disruption. But the mechanisms that reshape systems most durably are often the ones that operate within the existing language of procedure and precedent, drawing no attention precisely because they appear to change nothing. At the time, the country was exhausted by instability, eager for predictability, and willing to trust that experts knew best. Leaders framed the decision as a small adjustment, a necessary correction meant to smooth existing systems rather than redefine them. The framing was deliberate in its modesty. By presenting the change as technical maintenance rather than directional choice, those responsible ensured that the decision bypassed the scrutiny that politically significant actions normally attract. There were no speeches about transformation, no warnings about long-term consequences, and no expectation that anything fundamental was being altered. It was presented as maintenance, not direction. The distinction matters because maintenance implies continuation of the existing trajectory, while direction implies a choice between alternatives. By classifying a decision as maintenance, its authors removed it from the category of choices that require debate and placed it in the category of tasks that require only competence. What few noticed was how this single choice quietly shifted incentives, authority, and responsibility in ways that could not be easily reversed. It changed who decided, who benefited, and who carried risk, all without requiring public consent or debate. The redistribution was structural rather than personal. It did not empower specific individuals so much as it altered the pathways through which decisions flowed, redirecting authority toward channels that operated with less visibility and fewer requirements for consultation. At first, nothing seemed different. Life continued, institutions functioned, and attention moved on to louder events. But beneath the surface, the trajectory had changed, and history had already begun moving in a new direction. In the months that followed, the effects of the decision unfolded slowly, not through disruption, but through normalization, as new procedures quietly replaced old assumptions. Institutions adapted first, adjusting internal rules, authority lines, and expectations in ways that felt technical rather than political. The adjustments were incremental, each one small enough to avoid triggering the alarm systems that larger changes would have activated. Taken individually, none represented a significant departure from prior practice. Taken together, they constituted a fundamental reorganization of how authority was exercised. Because the change reduced friction in the short term, it was welcomed as efficiency, even as it narrowed oversight and concentrated influence. The short-term benefits were genuine. Processes moved faster. Decisions were less encumbered by consultation. The appearance of competent governance improved. These immediate gains created a constituency for the change that made future reversal politically costly, as those who benefited from the new efficiency had no incentive to restore the slower processes it had replaced. Those most affected were often the least aware, because consequences appeared indirect, delayed, and spread across systems rather than focused in one place. The diffusion of impact was itself a feature of the change. By distributing its effects across multiple domains, the decision avoided creating a concentrated group of adversely affected individuals who might have organized resistance. Public attention remained elsewhere, focused on visible challenges while this shift operated in the background, reinforcing itself through routine. The relationship between public attention and institutional change is asymmetric. Attention follows drama, conflict, and novelty. Procedural shifts offer none of these, and therefore proceed in the absence of the scrutiny that more visible actions receive. Each successful application of the new rule made reversal less likely, as familiarity replaced scrutiny and habit replaced debate. The psychology of familiarity worked in favor of permanence. What people encounter repeatedly, they come to accept as normal, and what is accepted as normal is rarely questioned. The decision had only to survive long enough to become familiar, and familiarity would protect it from the scrutiny it had originally avoided. Officials began referencing the decision as precedent, expanding its reach without reopening the original question. The transformation of a decision into a precedent is one of the most powerful mechanisms of institutional change. A precedent carries the authority of the past without requiring the justification of the present. Once established, it can be extended to new contexts without the debate that the original decision would have required. What had started as a minor adjustment was becoming a framework, quietly redefining how power flowed and how accountability functioned. The absence of resistance was interpreted as approval, even though awareness had never truly existed. This conflation of silence with consent is a recurring feature of procedural change. The absence of objection is treated as evidence of acceptance, even when the absence reflects ignorance rather than agreement. And with each passing step, the cost of questioning the decision grew higher. The conflict emerged when the accumulated effects of that quiet decision finally became visible, revealing a system that now operated very differently from what people believed they still had. Power had shifted upward and inward, not through force, but through procedure, leaving fewer checks and fewer moments where consent was required. The concentration of authority had occurred so gradually that no single step triggered the institutional or public responses designed to prevent it. The safeguards that existed were calibrated for dramatic seizures of power, not for incremental procedural drift. When challenges arose, responses felt faster and more decisive, but also less transparent, as justification relied on rules few remembered approving. The efficiency that the new system provided was real, but it came at the cost of deliberative processes that had previously ensured decisions reflected broader input and consideration. Citizens sensed change without being able to name it, experiencing reduced influence while being told participation still mattered. The gap between formal participation and actual influence widened, creating a condition in which the structures of democratic governance remained in place while the substance of democratic decision-making eroded. Attempts to question outcomes were met with references to established process, turning debate into technical discussion rather than democratic choice. The procedural language that surrounded the decision served as a barrier to public engagement, requiring specialized knowledge to navigate and discouraging the kind of broad participation that might have challenged its premises. The buildup intensified when a major test exposed how limited public input had become, making clear that authority now flowed through channels insulated from accountability. What once seemed like efficiency now felt like distance, separating decision-makers from consequences. The system had not failed. It had succeeded too well, optimizing control at the expense of consent. This was the moment when people realized the change was not temporary or accidental. It was structural, and reversing structure is far harder than noticing it. The climax arrived when it became undeniable that the decision everyone ignored had quietly rewritten the rules of participation itself. What once required debate, consent, and visibility now moved forward automatically, shielded by procedure and familiarity. There was no single moment of collapse to point to, no dramatic takeover, and no clear villain to blame. The system had changed without breaking, which made it harder to challenge and easier to accept. The resolution lies in understanding that power rarely announces itself when it expands. It grows through moments when attention drifts, trust replaces scrutiny, and silence is mistaken for agreement. This story matters today because the same pattern continues to repeat across governments, institutions, and societies. The most lasting transformations often arrive not through force, but through neglect. History shows that democracy does not disappear overnight. It erodes when small decisions go unnoticed, and when people assume nothing important is happening. The lesson is not fear, but awareness. Direction is always being set, even when it feels like nothing is happening at all. Subscribe to join the journey.